Have you ever gone to Google looking for the best type of exercise for PCOS? And then you're bombarded by all these different articles and sites that are telling you that you should not do this type of exercise because it raises your cortisol too much. Or you should avoid this other exercise because it raises your cortisol too much. And this one's bad because it raises your cortisol too much. By the time you're done, you're looking at it going, there's no exercise out there that I can do. Every exercise raises my cortisol too much. Or the advice you're given is to do these exercises where you're grabbing little Legos or something and slowly doing these exercises that aren't going to do anything for you. So today what I want to do in this video is I want to dispel the myths that are all over the place when it comes to cortisol and exercise. And I want to help you really understand what cortisol does, how you can work with it. I'm going to be really clear on that one. We want to work with cortisol, not try to sidestep it. And that's honestly with every hormone in your body, you want to work with it instead of trying to eliminate it or trying to always reduce it down to the lowest levels. We want to work with your PCOS hormones so that we can make sure that your body actually sees the results you want to see. So again, when you look online, you're going to find articles that say that cardio is bad. You shouldn't do it because it's going to raise your cortisol. Or you're going to find that lifting weights is bad or doing intervals are bad. Now, why are these things bad or why can they be bad? Well, really what it comes down to, it's how you do them. If you're not giving yourself enough rest in between all of your cardio sessions, that's not a good thing. If you're not giving yourself enough rest between each of your lifting sessions, it's going to raise your cortisol too high. If you're doing HIIT exercise every single day for long bouts of exercise, you're going to have some serious problems. All of those are going to cause problems if we're doing them in the wrong way. So again, today I want to make sure you understand how to do them right, how to mix and mingle everything in the right way so that you can use your cortisol correctly, so you actually see some benefits from your cortisol, and so you can actually lower your cortisol long term. So now what does cortisol do for our body and why is it important? Cortisol is extremely important. It's one of your fight or flight hormones, so it's basically there to help you run away from something or work out or do something that takes more effort than just sitting in a chair doing nothing. Well, what cortisol does is it does a whole bunch of things for your body. All sorts of things. It affects almost every cell in your body in one way or another. But some of the very important things that it does is it works with something called gluconeogenesis. Now, gluconeogenesis is a really long term that basically means creating new glucose molecules, creating it from something else. So what cortisol does is it helps us create glucose molecules that we absolutely need for our body. One myth out there is that you just don't need glucose. No, glucose is the most important nutrient in your body, the absolute most important one. I've never heard a doctor or I've never heard someone come to me and say, oh man, my blood fat levels are just too low. I don't feel very good. Yeah, all the time you'll hear someone say, oh, my blood sugar levels are too low or my blood sugar levels are too high. Our blood sugar levels are extremely important because glucose is literally the most important fuel source we have in our body. Without it, we have serious problems. We need all the other ones also, but again, glucose is the most important and our body fights to create that. With the keto diet, the reason why you go into ketosis is because your body is fighting to create glucose. That's exactly why it does it. So gluconeogenesis is a very important process inside the body, and cortisol is one of the main regulators of that. Another thing that cortisol does is it actually goes and it breaks down protein so we can convert that into glucose. That's the main thing we'll use to create glucose. We don't really use fats very much. We create it from amino acids or proteins. Another thing that it can do is it can suppress your immune system. Now, that can be a good and bad thing, obviously. If you're getting your immune system too low, that's a problem. But if your immune system is out of whack and it's going too high and you've got something where you're always inflamed and all that, cortisol can help suppress that immune system a little bit. Now, some problems with cortisol is it does cause you to store more belly fat, more fat around your belly, so kind of on your love handles in the front. Specifically causes you to store something called visceral fat. So we've got different levels of fat, different types of fat. We've got your subcutaneous, which is underneath your skin. It's the fat that you can grab and you can squeeze a little bit. Then you have visceral fat, which is actually underneath your abdominals and around all of your organs. That's probably the worst type of fat we have if we have too much of that. And so that's where cortisol can be a concern. Now, another thing that cortisol can do is it can actually cause us to retain some water. And so this is actually a common reason why somebody with PCOS can put in a ton of effort, lifting weights, doing intervals, doing whatever type of exercise, eating really well. Then they go and get on the scale and the scale doesn't move. And they may say, well, I'm feeling slimmer, but I just don't see it on the scale. That could be because of higher levels of cortisol. Having high cortisol can be a problem, but let's talk about when it's a problem and when it's not a problem. And to do that, we have to understand the difference between chronic high levels of cortisol and acute high levels of cortisol. Now, a great way to understand the difference between chronic and acute is to kind of think about scratching your arm. Let's say you've got an itch on your arm and you start to, you're here and you kind of scratch a little bit. If you do it for, just like that, the scratch goes away, no issues with your arm whatsoever, no problems. It's not going to have long-term ramifications. You're not going to have any issues with your arm later on. But what if you were to get your arm like this and you were to sit and scratch it like this and keep scratching it and keep scratching it to the point where you're scratching your arm nonstop for days at a time. What would happen? Well, obviously, eventually you'd start to wear it down and you start to get some sores on your arm. And if you kept going at it, eventually you'd start to get there and you start bleeding everywhere. And then eventually you'd probably be down to the bone because you start rubbing all the tissue off. Even if you weren't pushing really hard, but you just had constant scratching, constant rubbing on that arm, eventually you're going to have some problems. So acute scratching, no problems whatsoever. Might even be good. You might have something that you need to get off your arm, right? Chronic scratching on your arm can be a serious problem. And that's the exact same thing with cortisol. Acute short-term spikes in cortisol are actually really, really good. Long-term rises in cortisol where it stays up for a very long period of time, for days and weeks, that's when we have a concern. And that's where we need to be careful when we're talking about cortisol. So if we look at the list of issues when we have high cortisol for a long period of time, we can have things like it might raise our testosterone levels. And with the PCOS, we know that's an issue, right? It can actually mask our fat loss. And I talked about that a second ago where you get on the scale doesn't move, but maybe you feel a little bit smaller, but the scale's not moving because it can cause you to retain the water. And that has caused a lot of people to give up on their goals, even though they're actually seeing fat loss and the progress they want to see. It's just not showing up on the scale. Now, along with that, it can actually make it harder to lose belly fat because your body's doing really good at storing it there. And like we talked about earlier, cortisol affects your immune system. So if cortisol is high for a long period of time, it can actually make it so you get sick more often or have other issues related to your immune system. People also see a lot of hair loss with high levels of cortisol for a long period of time. And another thing is that we actually may see that your metabolism gets slower with long-term high levels of cortisol. And the reason why goes back to that whole gluconeogenesis thing we talked about. That's a good thing. We want gluconeogenesis, right? We want to create glucose. But if it's constantly in a state of gluconeogenesis and we're constantly creating new glucose cells from protein, where are we getting that protein? Well, we're getting it from our muscles. So you're starting to see muscle loss. And that's why extreme dieting is a problem. Because one thing that people don't realize, and everyone focuses on the exercise side. Be careful, don't exercise, de-stress because you might be too stressed. But if you exercise too hard, your cortisol levels will get too high. You shouldn't do this type of exercise, that type, or the other. But here's my diet I want to give you. When the diet actually could raise cortisol just as much as a certain type of exercise. So we want to make sure we're also taking that into consideration. We're not going to get into diet today. We're not going to talk about that and the effects of that on cortisol. We will talk specifically about exercise and what it does. But if you're exercising too much or your cortisol levels are chronically high too much, you can actually slow your metabolism down, making it harder to, one, lose the weight, and two, to be able to keep it off long term. And typically when someone comes to me and they say, I've lost X amount of pounds and I've gained it all back, that's usually because they did things in a way that put their body into too much stress. So today I want to make sure you understand how not to do that. I'll give you a quick example of this. Just this week, I was talking to a client. Now she has just lost 100 pounds in our program and we wanted to celebrate with her. But she kind of was like, well, but I've done that before. I've lost 100 pounds before and I gained all the weight back. I said, well, how did you lose the weight before? She goes, well, I exercised for 2 hours a day and I ate about 1,000 calories a day. Okay, well now she's eating way too low, which is going to force her body to be in a stress response. So it's going to raise cortisol levels, start breaking down some muscle tissue potentially with that. And then she's exercising for 2 hours a day, which is a problem. And it's going to cause her to raise her cortisol too much. And now her body's under a lot of stress. She's losing muscle. She's slowing her metabolism down. All the other issues that could be associated with higher levels of cortisol. And there's other issues that we won't even get to in this video, but higher levels of cortisol with that. She gets to that 100-pound weight loss goal that she wanted to get to. She gets there, but by the time she gets there, she's exhausted. She's mentally fatigued. She's emotionally fatigued. She's just worn out. And then she gains all the weight back. Well, when I talked to her this time, I said, well, hey, how are you feeling right now? And she goes, well, I'm feeling good. I'm just eating normal. I'm exercising, but not crazy. I feel good when I exercise. I'm like, can you do this forever? And she goes, well, it's already a part of who I am now. I just do it. Oh my goodness. Are you gaining the 100-pound back? No, I'm not. Never. Because we worked with her cortisol as part of it. There's a whole lot more to it. We're going to focus on cortisol today. Now let's focus on the other side. What about the acute rises in cortisol? So again, short-term spikes where maybe we spike it after a workout, or maybe we do little things here and there that can kind of spike cortisol just a little bit throughout the day. Not raise it so much where you're fatiguing yourself and you're having problems, but little spikes here and there throughout the day. What can that do for you? Well, there's studies that are actually showing us that short-term spikes, so after a workout or doing something else that can spike your cortisol a little bit. After a fast, you wake up in the morning, cortisol tends to be higher. We can do some other things throughout the day to spike our cortisol just a little bit. That can actually improve our mood. It can actually increase our energy. It can actually make you more alert shortly after that spike in cortisol. It can actually improve your relaxation about an hour before or after you spike that cortisol. And there's also studies showing that short little spikes in cortisol actually reduce your stress and nervousness long term. And here's a really important thing for those of you with PCOS and insulin resistance at the same time. Those tiny spikes in cortisol actually lower your insulin levels. So we want those. We want to spike your cortisol every once in a while. Now, these are all blanket statements. I'm just saying that as a general rule. Are there certain people who need to be very careful? Yes, there are certain people who need to be very careful. Is that everybody with PCOS? Not at all. Is that most people with PCOS? Absolutely not. So yes, there are some people who need to be careful and not spike their cortisol too much, but usually they've gone to the doctor, they had tests done, and they go, oh wow, my cortisol's crazy high. Not someone who's like, yeah, it's a little bit high, we need to be careful with it. So now let's shift gears. We understand cortisol, a little bit about what it does. Now let's get into how we exercise and appropriately so that we're making sure we're actually working with your cortisol instead of causing crazy problems or being so afraid about cortisol that we're actually not doing the things that are going to get us the results that we want to see. So what do we need to do? Number one is we need to think about exercise differently. Exercise is not about burning calories. If that is your focus, if your whole focus is to go and burn as many calories as you can, you're doing exercise wrong. We need to change the focus. The whole goal of exercise is to stimulate your body to cause some sort of an adaptation. For example, if you want to get your muscles stronger, you have to challenge the strength of your muscles. If you push your muscles to the limit and they can't move a weight anymore, you can't lift any heavier, you're going to start to get stronger. If you're trying to improve your cardiovascular system, you have to push your cardiovascular system to the limit to be able to see the adaptations you want to see. That's with just about anything inside your body. If you want to see some sort of adaptation, you have to cause a stimulus. And that stimulus has to be strong enough that the body says, yeah, we need to adapt things. Think about flexibility for a second. Part of the reason why we get really tight, here I am, I'm sitting in my chair, right? Well, as I'm sitting in my chair, my hip flexors, my hip, the muscles on the front of my legs, those muscles are shorter. If I sit like this all day long, those muscles finally get to the point where they go, you know what? This is our normal natural position. We like it here. And so when I stand up, they don't extend all the way. But if I stand up and I extend them as far as I can go comfortably, and I'll get a little bit of discomfort in there, right? Get a little bit of pain, discomfort as you're stretching. If I do that, then the muscles go, ooh, we're going to a longer length. And it adapts so that you can start going to a longer length each time. And eventually you can get to the point, if you're stretching every day for the most part, if you're stretching to the point where your muscles feel some discomfort, eventually you'll start to improve your flexibility. So again, to reiterate, if we do not cause a strong enough stimulus, we will not see any changes in our body. So we have to challenge our body enough so it says we need to break down a lot more fat, or we need to actually get better at using fat as energy. Those are things we need to do. Now with PCOS specifically, there are some very specific adaptations that I want to see as an exercise physiologist. Now, one thing that's not very well understood in the PCOS world is something about a hormone called adiponectin or adiponectin, however you want to say it. Adiponectin is how I say it. Now, adiponectin is a hormone that is really important for our metabolism. A couple of things that it does is it actually activates our cells so that they create these transporters that can take fat and move it into our cell where we can actually burn it. And along with that, they also can take a fat molecule and move it to the portion of our cell that we actually do the breaking it down and burning. Without adiponectin, we can't really burn fat very easily. And with PCOS, we tend to find that adiponectin levels tend to be lower. And so we want to see if we can spike those up so we can actually transport fat better. A few things I'm looking at. Number one is I want to make sure that you're able to break down fat easier. That happens with enzymes. That happens with different things inside your fat cells, with different hormones. As you exercise and you challenge your body's ability to use fat as energy, you have to increase those enzymes because the body wants to get better at breaking down fat. Not only that, once we break down the fat, we have to transport it to our muscles. And we want to get better at being able to transport it. Having more transporters, being able to transport it or package it easier so we can transport it and get more fat to our muscle cells. Now, once we actually get it to the muscle cells, we want to get more of that into the cell itself. And so we need to get better at moving it across the cell membrane. And we do that through adiponectin, being at least one of the ways that we do that. Now, once we get into the cell, we want to get better at getting it into the mitochondria and to do where we actually break it down and burn that. And the way we do that is through more molecules, more enzymes, more things within our cell. And adiponectin and other things help improve that. But we have to challenge those things for our body to go, you know what, we need to adapt. We need to actually get more of this so we can do better. Now, the interesting thing with all of this, talking about adiponectin, the best way to increase adiponectin is through high intense exercise. But wait, that's the thing that actually causes you to raise your cortisol and can cause all these problems, right? Yeah, if we don't do them correctly. So again, we're going to get into how to do them correctly. And the best way to do that is to make sure that you're getting enough enough rest between your workouts. Now, the main issue that I see happen when somebody does exercise in a way that does raise their cortisol way too high and it causes serious problems is that they're not resting. They get the flu, and what do? I've got to go exercise. No, you need a rest. Or I didn't get any sleep the night before, but I'm going to go get my workout in because that's what I'm supposed to do. No, you need to rest. Now, remember, exercise's goal is not to burn calories. You don't need to work out every single day. The whole goal of exercise is to cause a stimulus. Now, where do we actually see the change that we're looking for? Well, it's between the workouts. It's during the rest periods. And so we want to make sure that we're getting rest in. We're getting good rest in. You're getting the sleep you need. Along with that, you're getting the nutrients you need. Again, we're causing a stimulus, but with that stimulus, we have to see some adaptations within the muscle. We need to see an increase in certain enzymes, or the muscle cell getting stronger, or other cells getting stronger, or an increase in red blood cells, or whatever it might be. We need to see the increase in those things. Now, to see an increase in those things, we need proteins, because those are the building blocks of our cells and those enzymes and everything. We need nutrients, vitamins, minerals, other things like that from our vegetables, from our fruits, to make sure that we're able to have those things that can help. You think of vitamins, what they do is they're called a coenzyme. The whole purpose of a coenzyme is kind of like the key of your car. The engine, it works. The engine can do its thing. We've got the fuel there, right? The engine is like the muscle. The fuel is like the gas. Okay, we have those things. Why do we need the key? To spark it, to get things actually going. In a way, that's what vitamins do, is they're that coenzyme that helps things get going and get started. So we need to make sure we're getting enough of those things so we can recover from our workouts. And so a very important part of a well-designed program is that you're taking days off, and then maybe some days you're doing lower intense things. And you might even be taking weeks off every once in a while, or do lower intensity work through a week or so. We just need to make sure that we're getting enough rest after our workout, and we're not constantly just pushing ourselves harder and harder and harder. Otherwise, we're not going to succeed. All right, so now let's put together a really good program that's going to get you the results that you want and show you how to combine different types of exercises. So that's the first part. If you are doing the exact same type of exercise every single workout, every single day, you're doing things wrong. You need to do different types of exercises every day. It has nothing to do with muscle confusion. Every time I say that, people are like, oh, muscle confusion. Is that why we do that? No, we're not confusing your muscles. What we're doing is we're allowing muscles to rest. We're allowing different parts of your body to rest. And so when we do different types of exercises, other muscles, other parts of our body can actually rest. Not only that, different types of exercises actually cause a different type of stimulus for our body. We need strength type of exercises. The reason why is that actually creates a bigger engine, if you will, so that we can burn more calories sitting and doing nothing, or as we're moving throughout the day, so that we can handle more food. This actually happened just a little while ago. I had a client of mine who was eating like a bird. She was eating hardly anything and not seeing a lot of progress. And so we did some things with her exercise, and after a little while, she came to me and she goes, I'm actually starting to feel more hungry. Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I want more food. I said, no, eat more food. So she's been eating more food, and guess what's happening? She's losing fat still faster because we're building a bigger engine through doing the strength training. So we want to do strength training. We want to do cardio. There's benefits from cardio in terms of your cardiovascular system, your ability to break down fats, your ability to transport fats. All that can come from intervals and cardiovascular type exercises. We want to do flexibility type exercises, so we're not stiff and tight all the time. A lot of times we ignore that and then we get injured because we're off trying to do some other exercise. So we want to make sure we're incorporating that into our week and our program also. So to create an effective workout program, we need to stop thinking about individual exercises, meaning a squat or a bench press or a run or something like that, and also not think about individual workout days. Like, okay, on Monday I'm doing this workout. Stop thinking about on that micro level. We need to think it more on a macro level, a little bit bigger. What are we doing throughout the week? What are we doing throughout the month? What are we doing over the next 3 months or next year or so? So when we put together an effective workout program, we're going to have strength exercises involved. That's going to be things like lifting weights or calisthenics, doing push-ups, pull-ups, jumping jacks, stuff like that. There's also high intensity cardio, which a lot of you have heard about, high intensity interval training or HIIT training. That's one form of high intensity cardio. Another type is SIT training, which is sprint interval training. That's another thing we can do. Along with that, there's low intensity cardio. Things like riding a bike, going for a jog, doing a row machine, maybe even aerobics class. Those are all different types of cardio that you can do. So I always get the question, well, which one's best? Should I lift weights or should I do intervals? The answer is both. Well, should I do cardio or should I do something different? Should I do Pilates? Should I do this? Should I do that? The answer is all of them. Do them all. Now, do you have to do them all every day? No. We want to split them up throughout the week or even throughout a month. Let's talk about some examples of how you can put all them together so you're not overwhelming yourself with all these different workouts and everything and doing way too much. So here's how I would put together a workout program. If I had someone lifting or doing some sort of strength workout work out 3 days a week, then what I would do is typically have them do some sort of sit or HIIT training, high intense cardio, 2 days per week. Well, now we're at 5 days of exercise. Now, depending on the person, that might be all we have them do, or we may add in 1 more day of cardio. I don't usually have people do 7 days of exercise. I might have them do 6 days of exercise. I'd rather they stuck around 5 days of exercise. Then 4 is good, but 5 seems to be a really good spot. We just need to mix and match what type of exercises we're doing. Now, another example is, let's say we have somebody who really wants to develop strength. Okay, well, let's focus on 4 days of lifting, and then we do maybe 1 day of sit or HIIT training, or maybe 2 at the most if we're gonna do something like that. Or let's say we're on the lower end and someone can only do some sort of strength training exercises twice a week. So we do 2 days of lifting weights or some sort of calisthenics at home, and then we do maybe 2 days of sit training or HIIT training, the high intense cardio exercises, and then maybe 2 days of cardio. So again, we're at about 6 days of exercise there. We could do just 1 day of cardio, maybe only do 1 day of the sit or HIIT training. It really depends on the type of results you want. It also depends on the type of results that you're seeing. And it's gonna be different for everybody. And we need to look at your stress levels. We need to look at how your body is handling things. We need to look at how you're sleeping, how you're resting in between, how you feel before workout. There's so many things we need to look at on an individual basis, but we can put together a workout like that. Now, to bring this all together really quick, there is a total myth out there about cortisol and exercise. Every single type of exercise you do will raise cortisol if you're doing it appropriately. If you're doing it at a high enough intensity, that's going to get you to see some results. If you're not raising your cortisol, you're not working hard enough with that specific workout. And now there's also benefits from raising your cortisol. So when you do these exercises, we spike your cortisol. It can improve your mood. It can improve your ability to relax later on. It can improve your insulin levels and so many other benefits. But we don't want to make it chronic. So how do we do that? How do we keep it from being chronic based on your workouts? You get rest. You nourish your body. You take care of your body instead of starving yourself and beating yourself up in the gym. If you take care of yourself, you focus on getting good sleep, you focus on getting the rest you need between your workouts, you're getting enough of the proteins and the vitamins and minerals that you need, then your body will recover and you'll see a decrease in your cortisol long term. And lastly, instead of focusing on just one type of exercise, always going out there and running every day, or always going to the same class, or always doing something different, or always doing some other exercise that you really enjoy, what we need to do is make sure we're hitting your body in several different ways. We're doing strength type exercises a few times per week. We're doing high intense cardio with HIIT training or sit training, maybe once or twice or 3 times per week. And then you're also maybe incorporating some cardio in there if you want to. You don't necessarily have to do that. And so if we stop thinking about each individual day and just only hyper focusing on one day and one workout and what that one thing is going to do, and instead focus on what are we doing throughout the entire day with our workouts? What are we doing throughout the entire week with our workouts and our rest and everything? Then we can manage our cortisol and stop stressing, pun intended, about how our cortisol levels are. If you felt like this information was helpful, and if you would like my help in figuring out how to put together a workout program for you, one that's going to work with your hormones, one that's going to work with your PCOS and get you results, go ahead and go to PCOSmetabolicmap.com. Again, PCOSmetabolicmap.com. And you can schedule a metabolic mapping session with me. Now, in these metabolic mapping sessions, what I do is I work with someone to find out exactly what you need to do to see success, something that will work with your body, the main struggle that you are running into and what you need to do, instead of just these blanket statements of everyone with PCOS does this. Everybody with PCOS is an individual. Everybody with PCOS is different. Everyone's symptoms are a little bit different. Everyone's response to different exercises and different workouts and different foods are all different. And so we need to know what's going to work for you. So you can go to PCOSmetabolicmap.com and schedule a free metabolic mapping session with me. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.